Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 51 of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, for those of you who are regular listeners here to Camera Position, you've probably recognized that I've been gone. Yes, I've been on my annual sojourn making photographs in Italy, and I'm back with about 300 and some odd, 325 new photographs, new black and white photographs on 4x5 film, and 18 rolls of medium format color film, and a few dozen digital photographs. And one of the things that I get a fair amount of questions about is what I bring on these trips and how I pack for it. And so I thought I'd spend just a few minutes here while some film is drying to talk about what it is that I bring along with me and how I organize that equipment and material for my trips. Now, again, those of you who are regular listeners know that I am a fairly committed large format 4x5 photographer, so the primary piece of equipment I have is my large format camera, and I have a Deardorff 4x5 camera that I've been using, since the early 1980s. I bought it new in, I think, 1982 or something like that. And it's the 4x5 special, so it's actually a 5x7 camera with a 4x5 reducing back, so it's quite large as an object, but I really love it. It's a beautiful object, and it has served me well, and I've made tens of thousands of photographs with it. And a little over a year ago, I had the camera gone over and tuned up by Jack Deardorff, the great grandson of the founder of the Deardorff company, who is still doing a lot of the work with cameras. And if you have a Deardorff and you need some work done on it, Jack is around here in the Midwest, and I can give you his contact information. Send me an email, and he's got all the parts and can take care of the cameras. So and he did just a wonderful job of tuning up my camera. So that's my primary piece of equipment. I also bring along two lenses. I have some other lenses, but I've kind of stopped bringing them along. Let me tell you what I have. I have a 210 millimeter Schneider lens and a 120 millimeter Schneider lens. And those are the two lenses I bring along. I used to bring along a big 450 telephoto style lens, and the weight and size of that and the number of times I used it, I just didn't bother bringing it. And I also have a 90 millimeter lens, really cheap 90 millimeter Schneider Angulon that I think I paid $75 for or something used, but it's not a particularly great lens, and I was using it infrequently as well, so I don't bring that along with me either. And I find that I am able to capture most everything that I want with the 210 and the 90. The 210 and the 120 lens. I periodically want a 300 something lens millimeter focal length, but I just have never ponied up the cash for one. So that's what I bring along in terms of camera and lens. Cable releases, obviously, for each of the lenses. I bring along 12 film holders, which gives me 24 shots, since there are 2 sheets of film in each film holder. And that seems to be a pretty effective method for me in terms of how much time I'm able to give to making photographs in a day. Occasionally I run out of pictures, but we'll deal with that in a minute with some other equipment that I wanted to tell you about. Regular listeners or longtime listeners to the podcast may recognize in this image, and I'm following along with these images of these objects here in the enhanced podcast, and I'll put some of the images on the cameraposition.com blog page as well. But longtime listeners will recognize my incredibly beat up but incredibly useful cardboard viewing frame. And the cardboard viewing frame and its ability to allow me to look at an image, crop an image without having to get the camera out of the bag and out of the onto the tripod and a lens on the camera is a tremendous time saver, both in terms of finding photographs that I want to make photographs, or scenes that I want to make photographs of, and also in terms of finding things that just aren't going to work out photographically. So that's a particularly useful object, and that goes into the camera bag, as does a pair of magnifying glasses. You know, I'm 48, so I need to have something that helps me see the ground glass a little bit better. So those magnifying glasses are extremely useful to me. I also include a red filter and a yellow filter. Most of the time, in fact, all of the time now, I'm shooting black and white film in the large format camera, and the red and yellow filters allow me to darken skies or darken some shadows if I need to. I don't use them very often. When I do, I use them with the filter holder that's pictured here in the picture. But I do use them from time to time, and they are useful and saves me a little bit of time later in post-production in Photoshop, not having to darken the sky and not having to try and figure out how to darken around the clouds and all of that sort of thing. So the traditional strategy of using panchromatic film and color filters. I didn't put it in the picture because I think I've used it once in 15 years. I have a green filter, but I just don't use it very often, so I didn't include it here. I also have a reciprocity failure chart. That's that sort of rectangle in the lower left corner of the photograph here, and a bellows extension chart for figuring exposure for long bellows extensions. And those of you who are large format photographers know that once you get the bellows extended more than about 1.5 times of the focal length of the lens, you wind up having to compensate for exposure. So I've made up a little chart for the lenses that I have so that I don't have to do the calculation of it, and laminated that, and that goes into the camera bag. Also, my light meter, I've long used a Pentax digital spot meter. It works great. I love it. It's pretty easy to use. At some later point, I'll tell you about a quick little modification I've made for those of you who have these Pentax meters or another spot meter with a sort of slide rule dial on them. You might find this little simple piece of paper modification to be slightly useful to you. A focus magnifier, I don't use that very often now that I'm using magnifying glasses, but occasionally especially for close-up images, I will use that focus magnifier. A dark cloth, obviously a fairly important piece of equipment. I've got this really nice, I keep thinking about replacing it because it's so incredibly filthy, and dry cleaning, which is what's recommended, doesn't seem to help. But this very nice Calumet dark cloth with some weights at the corners. It's nice and big. It's dark on one side, light on the other side, and I like it light on the side that is up toward the sun, because then it doesn't get quite so hot under the dark cloth. The little yellow pen-like object is a flashlight, which can be extremely useful from time to time when you're in dark conditions. Mine's I don't know why I have this. I'm sure it came from one of my kids when they were really little, but it's a Bert and Ernie little pen light flashlight, and it's one of those kinds of flashlights that only is on when the button is depressed. So I've got a rubber band around it to hold the button down when I don't want to have to hold it down with my hand. So that's the 4x5 gear that I have in the camera bag, and then I also have a Hasselblad that I carry along with me, and I carry 2 lenses with the Hasselblad. I own a Hasselblad 501 CM, and when I bought it, it came with the 80mm lens, which I've used quite a lot and made a lot of photographs that I really quite like with it. But I also have another lens that I carry along with me for the Hasselblad, and that is courtesy of my good friend Bud. Bud, who has a Hasselblad setup, and he has this wonderful 120 macro planar lens. So it's slightly longer than my 80, and it's a macro lens. And as Bud said yesterday when I was talking to him about how much I appreciated the loan of his lens and how I keep thinking that maybe one of these days I'll buy one, he said, "You don't need to buy one. You've got a friend who will loan you one." And golly, a good friend like that is a good guy to know. So thanks, Bud, for the loan of annually for the last few years, the loan of the 120 macro planar Hasselblad lens, which is a beautiful lens, and it focuses really close, and I use it quite a lot. And in fact, is the lens that I keep on the camera most of the time, just because it's such a beautiful lens. In addition to all of that stuff, obviously, I've got a tripod as well, and I use a Gitzo tripod. I bought it used for a long time ago and for not much money. And ultimately, I've wound up with a ball head for the tripod. If you've never tried a ball head, if you've got somebody you know who has one and you can borrow one for a little bit and try it out with medium format, small format, large format, I'm not even sure if I care which, unless you are really in need of precision, studio style precision camera positioning. A ball head can be a really useful thing, and I love it because it saves me a ton of weight and some space, and it's really easy to use, and I just think it's a terrific head. I've got still got the pan tilt head that I bought when I bought the Gitzo tripod, and I have another tripod with a geared head, which I hardly ever use anymore just because it's so incredibly heavy, but it is a pretty useful object. So a really sturdy tripod is obviously really important. You know, I often tell my students that when they're buying a tripod, they need to buy a real tripod. Don't go to the Walmart and buy a $25 tripod. Go to a good camera store and buy a good tripod. It will be an investment that will last forever. It will be one that you will use all the time, or at least you should use it all the time. Because I think you'll find that the more you use a tripod, the more carefully considered your photographs are going to be. And of course, there's also the sharpness factor. So using a tripod with any camera will allow you to make sharper images because you're not moving the camera as much, and there's not the problem of pressing the shutter release button and having the camera move on you. For 4x5 film, traveling with 4x5 film is just it's a labor of love. I have to admit that. The tool that has made this labor of love a whole heck of a lot easier is the Harrison Film Pup Tent. This is a changing bag. Those of you who've been in photography a long time, you probably remember changing bags. Changing bag, but this one sort of looks like, when you go to the sporting goods store and you see the little models of all of the tents, so that they don't have to have all the tents set up in the sporting goods store. That's what this thing looks like. It looks like a little tiny model of a tent, and it really is, in fact, a little tent that has the little snap together aluminum tent poles that hold it up, and a double zipper, as most changing bags do, and a couple of sleeves with elastic around them, as most changing bags have. And the real advantage is the huge big space that's inside of the film pup tent. And Harrison makes several different sizes of this. They make a little one, and this is the medium-sized one, and then they make a really big one for 8x10 photographers. But the really huge advantage of this is that before I owned this thing, I would have to wait until it was dark and figure out in the place where I was staying, wherever that might be, how to make the room dark, if there were lights on outside, or glowing emergency lights somewhere, or light coming underneath the door. I'd bring tape along, and I'd bring mashed towels and clothes and stuff under the doorways. With this thing, I can change film in the middle of the day, in the trunk of the car, on the wherever. I mean, boy, it's just a tremendously huge advantage in terms of being able to get these pictures made in the way that I want them to be made with this large format camera. And the last thing that I have along with me is a digital camera, and I have this little Canon G6 that I bring along with me. I think it's a 7 megapixel camera. I'd have to leave the headphones behind and go into the other room to get it, but it does what I need it to do, which primarily is record keeping. I don't really make a whole lot of photographs with it, although I did on this particular trip make one set of photographs that I'll talk about in an upcoming camera position, with regard to talking about how your mind thinks of one thing you're going to do, and situation sort of requires that you end up doing something else. So we'll talk about that later on, but it's a nice little digital camera. One of the things I like about it is that it has one of those swiveling screens on the back so that you can hold it way up over your head or put it way down on the ground, and you can easily look through it. And it does what I need it to do pretty well. And it's I like Canon digital cameras pretty well. So I don't bother bringing along my 20D, the SLR style camera. So that's the gear that I bring along with me. I put it into a bag. I've got a really nice, great big Tamrac bag, and believe it or not, the Tamrac bag holds all of this stuff. It it holds all of this stuff. It ends up weighing just a ridiculous amount, which is why I pack really light in terms of clothing. I bring a couple of pairs of pants and a few t-shirts and a couple of long sleeve shirts and a sweater, and pretty much I'm good to go with regard to clothing. So my camera gear takes up, I've got a tripod bag that I put the tripod in while flying, and the camera bag goes along with me. And believe it or not, this thing fits into the overhead compartment on most good-sized airplanes. And when it doesn't fit into the overhead compartment, I'm usually able to cajole the flight attendants to stick it into one of those forward compartments for me, explaining what it is and why I can't check it and so forth. So I've never really had a problem flying with the bag. The other thing that people always ask me about is how I deal with traveling with film in these heightened security days. And I'll tell you how I do this. And in the United States, I've never had a problem with this. And in other countries, I have to sort of punt. But I'll explain how this goes. When I leave the United States to go on a trip, for example, like I just went on, when I leave the U.S., I allow myself almost 4 hours, 3.5 hours at the airport. And I arrive at the airport really early, and I have all of my film, and I brought along about close to, I think 300 and, I don't know, 425 sheets of Tri-X black and white film on this trip, and again, I think I said 20 rolls of medium format 120 film, and just a 1 gigabyte card for the little digital camera. So I arrive plenty early at the airport. I have all the film in plastic Ziploc bags, and I allow the camera and all of the gear to go right through the X-ray machine, and don't worry about it at all, and ask very politely, very nicely for a hand check of the film. And occasionally the TSA guys will say, you really don't need a hand check. And I say, well, here's my deal. My deal is I'm going to be gone for a while, and I'm going to, whether it's true or not, I say I'm going to be going through multiple airports, and that because I'm going through multiple airports, I'm going to have the issue of having multiple X-rays, and I'd really like to minimize the X-ray, and I've got plenty of time, and no worries, and take your time, and let me know if there's anything I can do to help you examine the film. And, they usually ask, can we open the boxes? And I say no, and I explain why. And then they use the little swabby thing that helps them determine whether there's any kind of explosives in the boxes. And it takes some time, and they are, sometimes not tremendously happy about it, but they'll do it. And you just have to be extremely patient and polite and explain that your flight doesn't leave for 2.5 hours, and you've got plenty of time, and not to worry, and you're happy to cooperate with whatever they need. And occasionally they'll want to look inside the camera bag as well, but usually, because that's gone through the X-ray machine and usually been triple scrutinized because they're not used to seeing a 4x5 camera, that part is really not a big deal. So the problem, of course, is coming back through other countries. I speak a little bit of Italian, and in the past tried to talk the Italian security folks into doing a hand check, but golly, it just doesn't happen as easily in Europe. They're a lot more security conscious. A lot of them are holding on to Uzi submachine guns, so you just sort of roll with it and allow them to X-ray the film. And my hope is, and it sure has played out over the years, when I have allowed them to X-ray the film, my minimizing of X-ray exposure through asking the English-speaking folks in the United States to hand inspect means that I end up not having any fogging. And I've never, ever, knock on wood, had a problem with fogging of any film using this methodology. So I have occasionally used the little lead bags, though a TSA guy once told me recently that, if you use the lead bags, all they do really is just turn up the X-ray volume until they can see through the lead bag, because they're thin enough that they can. So I don't know if it's really worth bothering with that, frankly, because you're going to get the X-ray dose anyway. But all that's really required to carry all this stuff with you is a strong shoulder to carry the bag, and enough fortitude to be able to make the decision that this is important. And another question I often get is, well, why are you doing this? Well, those of you who are large format photographers know exactly why I'm doing this. The methodology of making photographs in this way is really beautiful. There's something I really like about looking through the camera. I really like the sort of solitude that I get when I'm under the dark cloth. Even if there are thousands of people around me, hundreds of people around me, it doesn't really matter to me because I'm all by myself under the dark cloth. And I really like that solitary experience of making photographs. And obviously, for those of you who are at least marginally familiar with the kind of work that I do, because I'm doing so much architectural stuff, being able to do some of the swings and tilts with the view camera can be very, very helpful in terms of straightening out perspective and so forth and so on. So the view camera for me is a tool that I think I'm going to keep using for a pretty long time. Another question that I get sometimes is, why don't you just shoot color negative film or color transparency film in your view camera, and then if you're doing post-production in Photoshop, then you could just convert from color to black and white, and then you'd also have a color photograph if you had a subject that you really liked. And I thought, golly, I used to do this. Here's what I used to do. I used to bring along with me some film holders that I would dedicate only to color photography, and also chrome film and sometimes negative film. And here was my deal. First of all, I didn't make as many color photographs as I thought I would. So having the added complexity of these extra color holders and not having as many black and white holders in terms of weight and space in the camera bag, well, that didn't work out for me. So what I wound up with was this idea of bringing along a high quality camera that I could use exclusively for color photography, and that is the Hasselblad. Yes, it adds a lot of weight. Yes, it adds a little bit of complexity to my camera bag, but it also allows me some flexibility. So on days when I just don't want to bring along the 4x5 camera, or I'm in a situation where that camera would be too difficult to use, too cumbersome, tripods are not allowed, etc., then I have either the digital camera or the Hasselblad to be able to make color photographs. And then the other thing is that shooting color transparencies, for those of you who've done it, know that it's, boy, if your exposures aren't exactly spot on, you're pretty much out of luck. And color negative material, I found really not being terribly satisfied for black and white work with the grain structure of the color negative material. For color work, I think it works great to scan this material, but somehow it didn't end up with the same kind of creamy quality that my Tri-X negatives developed in Kodak HC110, as I've done since, golly, 1981 probably. Those negatives for me are exactly what I'm looking for in terms of the quality of the image. So that's a little bit about my gear. I'm happy to be back. I'm happy to be back in front of the microphone, and I have some ideas on tap here that I'm going to be recording over the next few days, and you'll probably see a slightly increased frequency of Camera Position podcasts for a little bit, and then we'll go back to sort of a once a weeker kind of a deal. So Thanks again for being here. Thanks for those of you who have left such really kind comments on the iTunes site. Don't forget to visit the cameraposition.com blog page. I've had some trouble with it resetting the visuals to the wrong visuals, and I'm going to try and fix that over the next few days. But I've got some interesting stories to tell you about my travels. I've got some ideas that I thought of while I was traveling, and I want to put all of this stuff down for you on Camera Position, which is the podcast about the creative side of photography. Thanks for being here. Camera Position is a proud member of the Photocast Network, your photo resource in the potosphere. photocastnetwork.com